Welcome to this event put on by the Peekskill Museum. My name is George Oros. I'm the current president of the Peekskill Museum. I'd like to first of all thank a few people, particularly Entergy, who helped underwrite the cost of putting this program on, and also the Hudson Free Library, which is allowing us to use this space at no charge. The only problem is, due to COVID, we're limited, and that's why the seats are where they are, and that's why we've got about 3 or 4 seats left, which is probably the stragglers that will come in. So I also want to thank our program committee and our presenters for being here and participating in this. I think you're going to really enjoy the program. A little bit about the Peekskill Museum. We're not-for-profit. We have no paid staff. It is all run by volunteers. We get no funding from the city or the state. It's all through donations and contributions and memberships. And if you're not a member, we have membership cards over there. The membership fee is very minimal. There's different levels if you want to join as a family or an individual, or want to give an even larger donation. We always welcome that. The museum's open every Saturday afternoon, but it also could be open by appointment. So if you have visitors in from out of town, if you have the first rule of being a public speaker is make sure your phone is off. And my speech teacher will be very disappointed. Where was I? Oh, right. So to become a member, you just have to pay the membership, send it into annual membership, and it provides you with programs for free. This program is for free because Entergy helped underwrite the cost. This presentation we're having it videoed. It'll be on our website, and we can provide a link to you so you can watch it again if you'd like to, or if you have friends that you want to send it to who couldn't be here today. We have several books on sale, including one by Wes, one of our presenters today, about amusement parks, abandoned amusement parks all around the country. And then there are some books that have been written mostly by John Curran, our vice president, who's a longtime member of our board and has been a Peekskill historian. And he's probably written a half-dozen books or so about Peekskill and the history of it. And they're very fascinating. So with that, I'm going to bring Mr. Curran up here to start us off, because this is going to be the history of Indian Point. A lot of people see that and they think it's only about the nuclear power plant, but Indian Point has a rich history dating back to before the colonial days, which is where John's going to take us. And then we're going to go through the era when it was an amusement park. I grew up in New Jersey. I moved up into this area around 1978. I didn't know about the amusement park until maybe a decade or so later, when somebody told me, do you know that the nuclear power plant used to be an amusement park? And now that it's decommissioning, maybe we can turn it into a nuclear museum amusement park. I don't know.
That's good.
So anyway, with that, I'm going to bring up John Curran.
Nuclear museum. First of all, I need to state that I am not an expert or an authority on this topic. I only started looking into it a couple of months ago. So what I'm going to show you today essentially is what I found. This isn't I totally understand it either, but maybe cooperatively we can get a better sense of the people that lived here, right where we are right now, before the Europeans arrived. So we have to sort of begin with the word, at least I would prefer to begin with this language situation that we have, in that we still generically identify the various tribes as Indians. And so how did that happen? Well, the European explorers were looking for a way to get to the Orient, to India. And that included, what's his name, Vespucci, was that his name? Americus? And Verrazano and Columbus and Henry Hudson as well. He was trying to find the northern passage, remember, to India? So essentially, when they bumped into this huge landmass, they didn't know where they were. So the people that they saw obviously were strangers and foreigners to them. And since they were looking for India, it was convenient for them to report back, I found India. And guess what? There are Indians living there. Now, it sounds like a joke, but it seems to be actually what happened. And that name persists, that we use generically to describe the people, but they had their own names for themselves. Where we are right now was occupied by the Kitchawonk. Now, did I pronounce that correctly? I don't know, because there's another language problem. When the Europeans recorded what they saw and what was happening, in their various documents and so on, narratives. They used their own language, and they tried to represent the native language phonetically. So you have phonetic versions of English, of Dutch, of French, and sometimes German. So take your pick here. Which one do you want to try? You know, they're pretty similar, so we can sort of, gauge in. So I'm going to say Kitchawonk, if it doesn't offend anybody. The region occupied by the Kitchawonk people was where we are now, reaching down to the Croton River. Right there on the north side of the Croton River, where Croton Point juts out there, they had a fortified settlement called Senasqua. When you drive down on the word, you see the word there, Senasqua. Well, that's the original Kitchawonk word for that settlement there. There was another one further north along Peekskill Bay, and that was called Sakos. Again, pronunciation, who knows, but that's the best I can do right now with that. And then their area continued up to the south side of what someone cleverly called Anthony's Nose as a geographical location. So go figure that one out. And then from the river, the Kitchawonk lived about, of course, estimating 20 miles inland. And some say all the way almost to the Connecticut border. Essentially, it's all of northern Westchester County. I have a map of that, but unfortunately, the slides I brought are not in the same order, but it'll come up. So maybe we should move along a little bit with this. Oh, I think the first picture is something authentically Kitchawonk, and this is an Indian axe head that was found in Depew Park. This was in the museum, Peekskill Museum, before I was there, and that goes back almost 30 years. And there was a local collector named Wilkie Todd, who's sort of specialized in the ancient artifacts and the unusual land formations and things like that, including minerals and so on. And I presume that this is from the Wilkie Todd collection. Indian axe head found in Depew Park. Depew Park is part of the Peekskill territory, and it's been designed as a pleasure park way back in the 1800s, but I don't want to digress too much, but this is an interesting piece, and we have dozens of these in the museum, various kinds of stone tools for the most part. We have even the grinding bowl, one of those things where they would take grains or nuts or things that they couldn't break up otherwise and sort of break them down that way. I think I have some other artifacts here. Oh, yes. Now, this is a very attractive, I was just going to say Kitchawonk piece. I can only presume that it is because there's no other identification on it. It's a deer skin. I think I have a fuller version of it here. Oh, there you go. It's a long piece. It's about 30 inches this way, horizontal, and it has leather deer strips here on the bottom. It has shells, shells cut through there in that almost middle section, and then you have the colorful beads, and then there's even designs further up on the top. And I'm not sure what this is. It's not a wampum belt, because a belt was a belt. It was just of beads and the shells for the most part, and that had value. It was trade value. But this is an arrow quiver, and it's well designed with wampum beadwork and so on. It's very artistically done. And it doesn't look like it was ever damaged after so many, at least 200 years. And so maybe someone later on can elaborate on this, exactly what it was. If it's an arrow quiver, it doesn't look like it was ever went through the woods or ever had arrows in it. So maybe it was some kind of presentation thing or something like that. I'm just speculating. I forget what comes next, but we'll take a look. Oh, that one? The Kitchawonk lived very simply for the most part, and that's pretty much the native lifestyle. It was simplicity and economy, and they didn't disturb the ground too much. They more blended in with their landscapes rather than what we do is change the landscape to suit us. For example, this is a house called a wigwam. And I saw two original sources that identifies the Kitchawonk as living in the wigwam. And we're also familiar in New York State with the longhouse. Mostly you find that upstate. That's generically Iroquois and the Seneca and people like that. But I've seen no evidence that the longhouses were in this area, but definitely that the wigwam was. How it's made is, well, I have a picture of the frame. It'll come up. I don't want to go through it right now, you know, back and forth. You take tree branches, or saplings they would, I guess we call them, and you bend them over, you make a round structure, and then you fasten them with the, you know, the leather rope or rawhides or whatever was available. There was a local man not a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, who explained to me that he was a descendant of the Kitchawonk. And from what he told me, I believe him, and I listened to him, because he claimed that he had constructed a wigwam frame on the top of what is now known as Fort Hill. So when I went up there and I took a photo of it, and that's coming up, and also he tried to explain the different symbols for the clans. Apparently that breaks down from the tribal group. A tribe, by the way, in terms of language again, comes from Latin. Tri, three, as in triangle, and so many different words that derive from that. Well, the tribe is a group of 3 or more extended families. Extended families can reach from 25, maybe even to, I don't know how many. But, so if you have, you know, these groups of maybe 3 or more extended families, you have people that understand each other, they're probably in some way related, and so that's how they identify themselves. And that's what the Kitchawonk did as well. Let's see, what is next here? Oh, well, before I get into that, I still want to talk about their lifestyle a little bit. Some of it is fairly obvious. Now, we're right next to a major river that does have fish, and it has crabs, blue crabs, and sturgeon way down below. So obviously that was used as a food supply, you know, for the tribe and for their, you know, very survival. And interesting little tidbit on that is that when the later deeds were drawn after, you know, by the Dutch and mostly by the English, and the list of items that were exchanged for presumably the ownership of the land lists 1,000 fishhooks. So that it sort of tends to indicate the importance of river fishing to the tribes along the river, and the Kitchawonk in particular. Also, it's well known that the native people grew vegetables. They had their own little gardens, and perhaps in this area, small farms. It's recorded that they had various kinds of beans, of course corn, and also, you know, the squashes and gourds and that type of thing. And that's traditionally known as originally Indian food. See, we can use those almost interchangeably. Once you have a clear idea of where you are, you could work that way. Also, land animals. In particular, the deer were very important to the tribes, because what do you have in a deer? Well, you have food, you have leather, you have clothing. You know, most of the clothing was described as deerskin. The women, I read one account, that was it. You just get, and they just wrap it around themselves, and that was it. A little sash around the waist, and it's pretty simple, but it worked for them. And so the other animals that were available that were used for various purposes are probably great value placed on bear. Bear did and still occasionally does roam through this area. So you have the fur, you have, you know, that type of meat as well, and other things that they could derive from that. Essentially, they gathered or hunted everything that was in the woods. I've seen lists of, you know, squirrels and raccoons and, well, don't exclude birds. They use birds to a large extent. partly for food and also for decorative purposes. And let's see. Yeah, I forgot a few animals, such as beaver, snakes, and so on. But you get the idea. Rabbits also were available. And the first Europeans that arrive in this area, the event happened not far from here, actually right off Verplank's Point. Henry Hudson was coming up on his half moon, and they anchored right, presumably right off Verplank's Point. So you can try to imagine that scene, that dramatic panorama. Here's this strange, they thought it was a floating house, described several times by the tribal people. They saw a floating house with strange people on it. And imagine, you know, the view from both sides. You know, here's the natives looking at this thing, and there was no other contact because it was, you know, so far away. But they were just amazed at each other. That was really the beginning of the whole contact situation. That voyage by Henry Hudson was a mixture of friendship and violence, actually. It began in a friendly sort of way where the tribes, you know, would, because they were mostly curious who these foreigners were. And sometimes Hudson and his crew were invited ashore and they would mingle with tribes. I think further up the river, happened around Poughkeepsie or something like that. But on the way back, the passage back to what we call New York Bay, there were some violent incidents where the tribal people came out in their canoes and they boarded the boat, you know, spontaneously, and this sort of threw the crews off guard. And they started rummaging through, the natives started rummaging through some of the things on board. And so there was misunderstanding, and the crew thought that they were stealing these things. Well, actually, they were valuable, you know, to the boat and the crew. They couldn't go back for supplies right away. And I don't want to go into all the details, but there was some deaths, I believe, in that as well, mostly on the Indian side. I think one of the crew members was also killed. The Dutch in particular, did I have Fort Amsterdam here somewhere? No, let's keep going. Oh, there it is. This is a very nice graphic of New Amsterdam. When the Dutch came in the early 1600s, they essentially claimed the territory of the entire Hudson Valley up beyond Albany a little bit, and they named it as New Netherland. Obviously, they came from the Netherlands, so this was New Netherland to them. And the community that they established on the very southern tip of Manhattan Island, they called New Amsterdam. Obviously, the city of Amsterdam in Holland, and so that's fairly easy to understand. You see on the very tip there, you see a four-sided, actually it's a fortification, and that was called Fort Amsterdam. That's pretty much where Battery Park is now. And that turned into later Fort Clinton and other types of things used by the revolutionary people. The Dutch not only allowed, but they encouraged their people to explore the river shorelines, the bays, the rivers, the creeks, and so on. And so most of these little individual entrepreneurs, you might say, because the Dutch were primarily interested in business. That's why they were here. Was it West India, East India Company was a business. It was a commercial venture. It wasn't really sponsored by the government. It was chartered by the Dutch government. But these people were here to make money, mostly from the natural resources. And so the people, for example, like Jan Peck, that's apparently the correct pronunciation of Jan Peek. He was one that we know about, and we have some you know, specific information there. He was one of those individuals. They had his own sloop was built in near Maiden Lane. That's on the southern not southern, it's the eastern side, but it's the lower portion of this map here. He and his wife lived there in that area, Maiden Lane. He had his own sloop, so he comes up the river and he meets with the Kitchawonk, and apparently it's friendly. Because, first of all, these tribes, they've been exchanging among themselves for who knows how long, hundreds of years, thousands of years. It's even undetermined how long the native people were here. I heard in Croton once, there was a program where the man was examining the shell beds off Croton Point. He found that they went down 10 to 20 feet deep, and they were trying to calculate the age of how that could have been, and he calculate almost to 10,000 years that, you know, the tribe was in this area. So anyway, they were familiar with trading, you know, barter exchange. You give me this and I'll give you that, and everybody's happy and everybody goes home. And what the natives were mostly interested in, because it was new to them, were these things made out of metal, mostly iron, but they were useful. A kettle, you know how useful an iron kettle would be back in those days? Because they had you know, stone and some wooden vessels and things like that. And also they're looking at an axe head, a metal axe head. You know how useful that is? Cutting down a tree or doing something like that. And knives were very much desired by the native people. For, again, obvious reasons. You know, it makes their life a little bit easier, because otherwise they'd have to use, you know, either a bone or a stone knife or something with a cutting edge or something like that. The Dutch were specifically warned by the administrators of New Amsterdam not to offer weapons, specifically guns and alcohol to the native people that they were encountering. Unfortunately, that was not well enforced. The other problem with that was that when the tribes saw these new weapons, they very much desired them, because it would, again, make their life easier in terms of hunting. The men were mostly the hunters. So imagine that you could fell an animal from here to there rather than, you know, closer up and things like that. And so the Indians did request, and they were given some of those early muskets and some pistols too, by the way, lead bars to make ammunition. And also, you have to say they did have a taste for the alcohol. Primarily, it was what the Dutch offered them were beer and rum. And you find in some of the deeds later on, I have that coming up, you know, the amounts that were really exchanged. And it's really, you can see a problem with that for people that were very unexperienced with this type of thing, you know, distilled spirits and so on. So this goes on for a while. But what happens, as we all know, as more and more immigrants came in from Europe, and they're coming from all over now, not just from Holland, they're coming from England and Belgium. There's Jews in there as well, you know, leaving through Amsterdam, because they're the most liberal of all the European countries and so on. And the Indians, okay, because there's more than one tribe when I say that, they felt threatened by all this happening so quickly, and where are they coming from, and what are they doing here, what do you want from us? Well, basically what they sensed was that the new people just wanted us to get out of the way, because part of the natural resources available in this land, obviously, once you cut down the trees, were also valuable, you know, to the Dutch for export. They used them, was the land. Once it was cleared, Europeans would establish their farms, the Boweries, according to the Dutch, and it was all through. It started in Long Island and New Jersey, and coming up the Hudson Valley. Okay, so you can sort of imagine the dynamic that's going on here. So the natives are trying to be as patient as possible, but there's a language problem. They don't really understand each other that well. So there's serious misunderstandings that take place. And then after that, people have hurt feelings. You know, I've been taken advantage of. You know, they were arrogant to me, and bada boom, you know, it goes like that. So there's another problem. The natives would see the new farm in a clearing somewhere, and around the farmhouse there would be domestic animals. There would be a cow, maybe a horse, and some pigs or chickens. Now, to the tribal people, this was fair game. These animals were there, and this is how we live. They didn't know the rules of, what you can take and what you can't take. So they did that. They took what they could, and there's several cases in the original Dutch documents that, because it was serious, it was recorded. What would happen is the farmer would come out and he would shoot at the natives. Maybe it was a couple of guys hunting, and sometimes they would hit them, and there was a problem. And so what did the Indians do? They would shoot back, or arrows, or whatever they had with them at the time, or clubs, or. Unfortunately, it went beyond that. Sometimes the people would come back because they couldn't understand the whole thing. Why are we being fired upon when we've been here the whole time and now there's new rules we don't understand? They would come back and burn down the farmhouse and pretty much attack everybody there. This happened too many times. So the Dutch would call out the malicious soldiers. Find that tribe, track them down, and teach them a lesson. This is sort of what happened. Very European sort of attitude. And so that didn't really make things better. It actually made things a lot worse. And it got so bad by the early 1640s. This was new to me, and it's so dramatic that it's kind of interesting. Apparently the tribes could communicate pretty well among each other, among themselves, because by the early 1640s, 7 tribes joined together, the warriors. They form an army of 1,500 fighters. And the tribes involved were the Wappingers, the Sinks, the Notchpeems, the Tupans, the Mahicans, or later Mohegans, but who knows in terms of phonetic translation, the Nyack, they spell it N-Y-E-C-K in the book, and the Kitchawonk. So these are all lower Hudson Valley tribal people. And they join together and say, this is it. This may be our last chance to solve this problem. What was the problem? Is that we're being pushed back and these other people are moving up. So their goal was to totally eliminate the Europeans from the area. And there's various ways of doing that. They would attack, they would burn, all different, ambushes and things like that. What did the Dutch do? Well, they were limited in number in the 1640s, so they retreated, back into lower Manhattan, and the remaining force of the Dutch wound up within Fort Amsterdam. That's all that was left. And they were surrounded by all these warring tribes. I'm going to read you a first-person account from a European inside Fort Amsterdam in 1643. Almost every place is abandoned. The garrison consists of but 50 or 60 soldiers unprovided with ammunition. Fort Amsterdam is utterly defenseless. These heathens are strong in might. They have formed an alliance with 7 other tribes. They are well provided with guns, powder, and lead, which they purchase for beaver from our private traders who have had for a long time free range among them. The rest they take from our fellow countrymen whom they murder. I mean, that's pretty dramatic. The Dutch were on the very edge of losing this war. Actually, it was kind of a war. And the natives were very close to winning. I mean, that's an amazing story. I never realized that before, that it was so dramatic. Let's move on. I have some other slides here. Oh. So before we get to that, there's a slide that should have been here, which isn't here, and that's that things were so out of control, they didn't really calm down until reinforcements came in from Europe, because, they're writing, where you need help, send more people and so on. So as more Europeans came in, things did settle down a little bit, And the Dutch finally realized, look, we have to deal with this, with these people in these situations. So they had 2 councils of peace, and they formulated a peace treaty. There were 2 ceremonies. One was inside Fort Amsterdam, and the other was on Croton Point near Senasqua. And there's I have a slide of this. Maybe I should wait we get there, but I have it in the paper as well. If I can find it easily, I'll read it to you. If not, we'll just wait. Oh, here it is. There's a plaque at Croton Point that states this. At this site, right, at this site stood a magnificent oak tree, under which, according to tradition, in AD 1645, and one of those words, Aepgen, Aepgen, chief of Sachem of the Mohegans, signed a treaty of peace with the Dutch on behalf of the Kitchawonks. The Kitchawonks are still very much a player in this whole thing, especially in Westchester County, what we call Westchester County now. And so there was some peace for some decades. Another 40 years go by, and a Dutchman shows up from New Amsterdam. His name is Stephanus van Cortlandt. He's from a wealthy family, and he negotiates 1,000 acres of where we are now, Buchanan and Verplank and part of Haverstraw, from the Kitchawonk. And apparently it's okay. So then another one comes up a little bit later on. Another Van Cortlandt family member, Catherine Van Cortlandt, and she marries Philip Verplank. So they're off on their own, acquiring more and more of this Kitchawonk land until finally the Van Cortlandt family winds up with almost all of it. That's 86 to 87,000 acres, the dimensions that I started with at the beginning, from the north side of the Croton River to Anthony's Nose, inland to wherever it winds up. Oh, it does wind up because the land included the town of Cortland, obviously, the town of Yorktown, Somers, Bedford, and part of what they call Lewisboro in those days. Oh, and North Salem as well. If you've ever been to North Salem, it reaches right into Connecticut. So that's pretty much what the Dutch acquired from the Kitchawonk. Really the last, a signal event occurs when Pierre Van Cortlandt establishes his, first it was a lodge house, a hunting lodge, or whatever it may have been, and then his actual estate on the north side of the Croton River, pretty much where it is right now, the historic site in Croton, the old Van Cortlandt house. Well, what does that signal? It signals that the Europeans have now displaced Senasqua, because that's where Senasqua was. That was the Indian village. And after that, as far as I can tell, the Kitchawonk sort of disappeared from the recorded history. So what happened? Well, some of it's obvious. People died in the warfare. There were diseases that were contagious from the Europeans. Some simply moved away, better hunting grounds or something like that. And some, I did see in one account where they would somehow merge with another tribe, sort of on the edge. They would be welcome in just to, stay with us and things like that. Before I forget about the slides entirely, I better go through them. Oh, what this tells you here are some of the things that the native people wanted. I had glasses here somewhere. And so right now you can read it better than I can. Where did they go? Oh, here they are in my pocket. Tobacco boxes. There's 1,000 fish hooks. Needles, very important. Iron or steel needles. 2 swords, 100 tobacco cases or something like that. 8 casks of rum. That's a lot. And 4 half casks or half, it seems to be a beer. And so on and so on. You know, also the natives wanted some of the woven cloth that the Europeans had. You know, obviously they like to, you know, have good clothing as well. And some they could make themselves, so they also asked for needles and so on like that. 12 copper knives. Well, let's go on, because I'm taking too much time. This was a copy of the deed transaction negotiated by the people from New Amsterdam that created Peekskill. Well, it was called, his name was Rick or Richard Abramson, and so it became known generically as Rick's patent. And the interesting thing is on the right side you hear, there's Sir Ham. He was a leader of the Kitchawonk, and Samakapapan or something like that, and so on. But see, they have like a shield and some kind of symbol there. That they understood because they did make little symbols for themselves. This is the original Stephanus van Cortlandt deed of 1683. And so you see what the Europeans were doing. They had to formalize these things with the tribes so that it was recorded, and so they would be intimidated by this legal stuff. But essentially they wanted the land. And so that's what happened. That's the way it went. Oh, here's the Treaty Oak site, and I already read you that whole thing here. And so there you go. They had to have a peace treaty because it was a bad situation. Oh, this is the area that we're dealing with somewhere in there. Oh, anyway, you're familiar with the maps of this area, you know, up to here from Bear Mountain down from Anthony's Nose. So that include Camp Smith and Ansville and Montrose and Buchanan and Croton, and then inland as well. There's the wigwam frame built by Haviland Gordnier. Now I was impressed. I thought, and it's very strong, and so it wouldn't move. It was very, very good. Well, that's the end of it. I guess at the end of me as well. So thank you for your patience.
Good job. Thank you, John. That was good. And we'll bring up our next presentation. We have Wes and Barbara Gottlock. Is that how you say it? Gottlock. And I just want to, I don't get any commission on this, but Wes and Barbara have 2 publications over there that are available for purchase. One's about the Lost Amusement Parks of New York City. The other one's of amusement parks in the Hudson Valley. And so they're here to talk about the next major aspect of what we call Indian Point, and that is the amusement park that was there whenever it was there. I'm going to learn. So come on up. Thanks.
I'll take 2 minutes. Barbara's going to take over. The reason for that is that book that we wrote a couple of years ago, Lost Amusement Parks of the Hudson Valley, we divvied up the chapters, and Barbara did the research into Indian Point. So in a moment, I'll turn it over to her. But just as a little background information, around the turn of the 20th century, there were these amusement parks popping up all over the Hudson Valley. New York City people sweltering in the squalid streets, the tenements needed relief for a day or two. They would traverse the river, either on a Hudson River, mostly on a Hudson River dayliner, stop off at Bear Mountain, Indian Point, Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, and so forth and so on, all the way up to Albany. And some people got the great notion to, wow, we can capitalize on the people who want to escape the city, just like they're escaping the city today, I suppose. In any event, these entrepreneurs were very wise. They decided to set up their amusement parks at strategic locations where they would be serviced either by dayliners or by electric trolleys, electric trains. This way they have the captive audience. There was no automobiles to speak of at the time. So we started all the way up in Electric Park in Columbia County, which is right on Kinderhook Lake. That was the first amusement park of a major nature in the Hudson Valley. That was started in 1901. and it was the largest amusement park from New York City up to Montreal, between New York City and Montreal, drawing over 1 million people a year for like the first 8 to 10 years of its existence. It was called Electric Park because many people under the impression that it's because it had electric lights. That was not true. It did have electric lights, but it was serviced by electric trolleys. Kinderhook Lake was located right in the middle of Albany and Hudson. And Kinderhook Lake was right in the middle, a great way for people to come from both cities and enjoy the day at Electric Park. That park went down in the early 1920s. Between 1900 and 1930 was the golden age of amusement parks in this area. Various factors led to their declines. Mainly the automobile was number one, fires number two, and there were various other reasons besides that. Orange Lake in Newburgh was another huge amusement area that was also serviced by the dayliners. You take your dayliner to Newburgh, hop on a trolley, and go out to Orange Lake. Woodcliff Pleasure Park in Poughkeepsie was the most modern of all of the Hudson Valley amusement parks. That started in 1927. It lasted through about 1941. That was the most grand, they were the grandest rides, the most modern rides that we ever saw in the Hudson Valley up until that point. We also had other smaller ones. I think there was even one in Peekskill that somebody mentioned to me not too long ago, kind of a smaller one. But Indian Point came along as one of the last ones, and Bob will speak more definitively about that. These parks lasted, and again, could lose their business overnight, usually by fire. And that was the big thing down in New York City as well. Many of the amusement parks, uninsured, took their chances, parlayed all their money, and overnight, they could lose their amusement park. And it's happened very, very often, okay? So without further ado, I'm going to bring Barbara up, and she'll give you the skinny on Indian Point.
Hi. Indian Point was very different from a lot of these other parks because Indian Point was owned by the Hudson River Dayliner. And I will explain what happened. The Hudson River Dayliner used to travel up and down the Hudson River and would drop people off at Bear Mountain, at Poughkeepsie, at other places up and down the river. So they were losing revenue during the day when their passengers were going off to an amusement park. So they got the brilliant idea, let's buy a piece of land in the Hudson Valley. We will take people from New York City to our park. We will keep them in our park all day, feed them, amuse them, and then they will come back on our boats. And that's exactly what they did. So in 1923, Indian Point Park was bought by the Hudson River Dayliner. And the Hudson River Dayline Company, by the way, started in 1863 and lasted until 1948. Okay, and that's why Indian Point kind of fits in with that. This is from 1933, a timetable, and you can see Indian Point, we figured out was 2:15 from the city. So I'm assuming they got 4:30 for the trip back and forth up and down the river. And you can see they named some of their boats. The Henrik Hudson, Alexander Hamilton, Robert Fulton, Peter Stuyvesant, DeWitt Clinton, and Clancy Depew were some of their boats that they owned. I've added a ticket. I don't know what the cost of this ticket was. I'm not sure what year it is, but that's a ticket that you would get for the trip up the river. And I like this. You could bring luggage up to $100 in value. I mean, I don't know where you think you were going with the luggage, but anyway. Now this is the biggest steamship of all. This was built in 1913 by the Hudson River Dayline Company. Now by 1913, the Hudson River Dayline Company really had become a monopoly. It started out with a few boats and it gradually bought out every boat that traveled up and down the river. So at the end, the only boats that traveled were belonged to the Hudson River Dayline Company. This is the Washington Irving, named after Washington Irving. And one thing, Wes will kill me, but I have to bring this up. My high school was Washington Irving in New York City. And when they christened this boat, the girls from Washington Irving High School traveled on the boat up the river for its first voyage. This boat had Hudson River painters I mean, real paintings of the real Hudson River the real Hudson River painters. It had an Alhambra room, which was mahogany that had writing desks for people to sit at. It would travel with the band. This boat held 6,600 people. It was the biggest one. It didn't last terribly long. It only lasted 13 years. One time in 1916, it was backing, 1926, it was backing out. It blew its horn to say that it was backing up, and a barge carrying barges couldn't stop, and it rammed the boat. The boat was able to make it across the river, and it sank on top of the tunnel. And so it was up to like the third deck, you could see it, and was there for about 13 years before they sold it for scrap. But it didn't last very long. This is a picture on the deck. And what I love about this picture is look at the way everybody's dressed. Just like we go to amusement parks today, suit and tie. And I believe this is Sugarloaf, so I think this is where the Bear Mountain Bridge is today. I think that's where this boat is at this point. All right, now here's a picture of Indian Point Park in the beginning. Doesn't look like an amusement park, does it? You can see the dock where the boats come in. You can see this red roof building, which was the swimming pool and athletic fields. In the beginning, it was called a pleasure park. You would come up, you would get a chance to enjoy the fresh air. You could go wading in the river, but there really wasn't much to do in terms of amusements as we know today. This was 320 acres that they bought on this property, and they were very smart. The Dayline Company built a farm on that property, so any food that you bought there or on the boats came from their own park, and that was something that they were very proud of. In the first year, when it first opened, 15,000 people came, which was kind of a lot. All right, it had, as I said, no amusements. This is the terrace where you can walk up, and they were smart about another thing. They made this park so that it was handicapped accessible, even though they didn't think in terms of that, because when the boat landed, you were able to get into the property without having to climb stairs. There were ramps and there were grassy slopes going up to it. Here's another picture down by the river, and the river's in the foreground here. This was an amusement park, a swing park, a playground for kids. There were a couple of hand-push merry-go-rounds, the ones that make you really sick when you have to ride your child on it, swings and things like that. And as I said, again, you can see the paths they might have been steep, but you were able to get up there if you happened to be in a wheelchair. We're inside the park, we're looking down. Of course, here's the dock. This building here is a dance hall. Now, that was the other thing that they were very smart about. When they brought a boat up the river on the weekend, they'd have a big band on it. The band would play all the way up to Indian Point. When it got to Indian Point, the band would get off the boat. They'd go into the dance hall. They'd play all day for your amusement and your pleasure. At the end of the day, when the boat came, they would get on the boat and go back to New York City. So you had music all day long at Indian Point. And this was the swimming pool. This was I've had this discussion about a lot of our amusement parks, but this was one of the biggest swimming pools. It was 100 by 150 feet. It had lockers for 1,500 guests. And it's interesting. As we were doing some research on Indian Point, what would happen when the boats came into the dock, girls would throw money into the river from the boat. The boys that were there that lived locally would go and they'd dive into the river and they'd find the money. Later on in the day, they would come up to the swimming pool and see if they could find the girl and spend the day with her before she had to go back to New York. It was interesting. I mean, people that grew up here and worked here said that they met their husbands and wives here because it was a local community. You were there all day together, and a lot of marriages happened as a result of people working at Indian Point. All right, here's another picture of the dance hall. by the river. It was open-sided. Yeah, I think it was 100 by 170. It was open-sided so the river breezes could come in, and as I said, people could enjoy dancing to the live bands, and they were all the big band in the era, and they would come up and play for them. Now, a little bit later on, they added speedboats, I should say. You can see the river was nice and rough that day. And this was an extra 75 cents to go on the speedboat. But the biggest thrill was, as it came into the dock, it would go straight in and turn at the last second to scare the heck out of the people. Do you notice the background here? Do you know what that is? Mothball. The mothball fleet, right? That was there from 1946 until 1970. And that was Jones Point across the river. So you can kind of date this picture a bit. Now, this is the bell from the Mary Powell. Supposedly, this bell is at the Kingston Maritime Museum, but it's not. There were two bells. The one from the Mary Powell was supposed to go to the Maritime Museum, and for some reason it got switched and ended up at a church in Kingston. The one that's sitting in Kingston is the other one. It's not the one from the Mary Powell. Now, the Mary Powell was one of the first boats that the Hudson River Day Line Company bought. So they really wanted to preserve this artifact. Although I don't know why they put it next to a garbage can. It makes no sense to me. But what would happen is when the boats came in the morning, somebody would ring the bell on the Mary Powell so that the people that were working in the park knew the boat is here. At the end of the day, they would ring the bell again to warn people in the park it's time to come back down to get on your boat to go home. And it sat there, it sat there for many, many years. Okay, now, up until this point, it's been a pleasure park. Okay, the only really exciting ride that you could say is that motorboat. There were no other rides. In 1949, a man named Emanuel Kelmans bought the park. And this is him, okay? He's standing in the middle. A couple of these, one of these is the mayor. I think the mayor might be this man. And these were trustees from Buchanan that were there. And you'll see now automobiles. Up until this point, people that came there came by boat, or the local people would come by bus sometimes, or walk, people that were in the neighborhood. When he bought the park in 1949, he added a parking lot for cars. And you can see it was 25 cents a day, and here they are cutting the ribbon. Every year that he owned the park, he doubled and tripled the rides and amusements that were there. And this was his first, this was the first diagram of the concession stand. You can see, I don't know, it's hard to read, but candy and malted milk. This is the actual building. And here is something, Wes and I, when we did research on amusement parks, every single one of them had one of those beer barrels. You know what that is?
Not beer.
It's not beer.
Hires root beer?
Hires root beer. Every single one had that. There must have been a concession out there somewhere, but every single one had Hires root beer. And now you're seeing hot dogs and hamburgers and drinks available. Okay. Now, as I said, he added rides and he added amusements. So every year, by the time he got done, there were 50 concessions. Some of them were stands, some of them were rides, some of them were just amusements. Now, this picture was taken in 1952, and you can see the clothing is already changing a great deal in that picture. This was the Westchester County Fair in 1952. Kelmans decided that he wanted to revise the county fairs that had gone out of style. So he had the county fair at Indian Point for about 3 years. And this was one of the years. And you can see the Ferris wheel in the background. These are not new movable rides. These are rides that stayed there permanently. And here's one of these little rides, a little dipper. What was the price? It's 20 cents for the Little Dipper. And 14 cents for adults. I don't see too many adults fitting into that, but a Little Dipper. There's another one, the airplane ride. And in the background, you can see a carousel. Now, this is a picture that's in the Buchanan Town Hall in the history room. It's a panorama. We tried everything we could to get a good picture of it, and this is the best we could do. This is one half of it. But this is kind of what I remember as a kid. Rides were 10 cents each, 3 for a quarter. And you can see in the back a caterpillar. You can see the circle swing, which every amusement park back in the day had it. Sometimes it was swings, sometimes it was horses, sometimes it was boats, depending upon the park. So this is one half of that mural, well, actually a third of it, and this is the other end. And here's a carousel. There was always a carousel in these parks. Now, again, in our study of amusement parks, we discovered that if I could have gotten a decent picture of a horse, and I couldn't, that we have somebody that would be able to identify who made it, what year, could give you the whole information. Yes.
That picture that you have, that's
Yeah.
my grandparents.
This is your grandparent here?
No, they own that park. That
They
part of it.
own that park.
That
Oh,
panoramic that you have, they got from us.
oh, fantastic. It's a great,
Went back, yeah, my grandparents, that was their section of the park.
that's great. Oh, that's amazing. There was also a putting green, like mini golf. Thank you. I'm drawing a complete blank. Okay, now we're coming into the 50s. Okay, we're in 1954. And Kellerman's decides that he may want to get out of the amusement business. Meanwhile, there's a company named Con Ed that is looking for a place to build their first publicly owned or privately owned nuclear power plant. So, Kelman's made a deal with Con Ed that they would wait 2 years so that he could give his concessionaires a chance to relocate, to pull their stuff out, rather than just saying, okay, it's sold. So in 1956, he sold the property. In 58, they finally left. This is the last major event that happened in Indian Point. The Christiani brothers had a circus, a traveling circus, kind of like Ringling Brothers. In fact, the Christianis were originally Ringling Brothers trapeze people that went in and took their own circus. But anyway, they were going to have this circus in Buchanan in a different location. They sold so many tickets that they needed to use their biggest tent, which wouldn't fit in the park where they were going to do it. So Kelman's invited them to come to Indian Point, and this was the last event that happened in Indian Point as an amusement park. Here's a picture inside of the tent, and you can see there are children here that are in wheelchairs and have casts. There was a school, I think St. Joseph's, that was for children that were handicapped, and we believe some of these children might have been from that school that came as guests to the park. And the last thing that happened was Indian Point, the first power plant went online in '62, and that was the end of the property of Indian Point. Okay. And now we've got...
Thank you, Wes and Barbara. I have to say that's a perfect segue. I mean, what a right to the thing, to the next presentation we're going to have here.
Better.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring up Brian Vangor, who is very familiar with Indian Point, the nuclear power plant there, and he's going to talk about the next phase of the use and the what went on at what we all know as Indian Point. You all set, Brian? Okay. In the meantime, I'm going to announce again, because I realized when I made the first announcement, it wasn't being recorded because you've got to talk to this microphone. So anybody watching at home, and again, anybody that came in a little late, just a reminder, the Peekskill Museum does not receive any government funding. We rely on memberships and donations and contributions. I want to thank Entergy again for helping to sponsor this program and sponsor other programs that we've done over the years. We have other corporate sponsors too. If you have a business, we're going to be sending out a solicitation letter in about 2 or 3 weeks to all the businesses around here if they want to become a business partner to the Peekskill Museum. We're open every Saturday afternoon. We can be open by appointment if you want, and we encourage you to take up a membership. There are different tiers of membership, but the entry level is a bargain, I'll tell you that. So, so we're very proud of our museum. We're all volunteers. We have no paid staff. You know, I think it shows. But anyway, we're going to move on with the program now. So, Brian, thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. Real quickly about myself, I started working at Indian Point 3 in 1980, pretty much straight out of engineering school. I spent first 3 years there, then I got my senior reactor operator's license in 1983. Spent the next 32 years in the control room, working inside the control room, outside the control room, all over the plant. And 5 years ago, moved over to the dry cask storage group, responsible for placing our fuel in dry storage. Let's see if this works. Okay, Barbara did go over some of this. October 8th, 54, Con Ed purchased 320 acres from Emmanuel Kelmans for $250,000. Pretty good deal, actually. For the purpose of building a power plant, Con Ed anticipated a 300% increase in demand of electricity in Westchester in the next 16 years. So this agreement, like Barbara mentioned, allowed Mr. Kelmans to continue to operate the amusement park for the next 2 years. The following February, Con Ed announced the plant would be an atomic power plant. And this would be the first completely privately funded such project in the United States following the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, which opened the door for private peaceful use of the atom. Construction at Indian Point 1 began in December of '56. This was going to be a 275 megawatt power plant. 60% of that would come from the reactor plant, while the remaining 40% is from an oil-fired superheater. Babcock & Wilcox was the primary contractor, and it was responsible for most of the major components of the plant. So here's some Indian Point 1 construction photos. Here, building the containment building. Looks like some Con Ed, I believe they're Con Ed officials touring the site. You can see the containment building is further along. If you notice here, that there's actually a round ball, we call it the sphere, which is located inside the containment building, which is the outer building here. The sphere is made of steel. The sphere is the building here is concrete. All the reactor and components are located within this. Will be located within the sphere. Here's an aerial photo, and you can see again the sphere here and the containment building. They're starting to build the turbine building over here, and you can see in the upper corner here, there's the swimming pool from the amusement park. And there's the ball fields and the recreation fields. Today, this swimming pool is still there, I believe. It's filled in. We call it the contractor lot. It's just filled in with gravel. The Unit 1 reactor vessel was the primary component of the plant. It was 230 tons, 40 feet long, contained 120 fuel assemblies. There was a 30-ton reactor head that sat on top, was held in by 50 bolts that were 5.5 inches in diameter, about 4 feet long. And that was moved into the containment building around 1960, May 1st. You can see the reactor vessel being brought into the containment building right here. Much more of the plant is finished here. That's the superheater building and the stack. And on this side is a artist's rendition of what the Unit 1 reactor looks like. You can see the size of an individual. There's the reactor head that I spoke about, and the core is right here in the center. Over here on the bottom are the inlet nozzles, and on top are the outlet nozzles. This is a picture. The Unit 1 reactor vessel is now installed in the building, and here's the core barrel being installed, or test fit. Here, the reactor is now installed in the containment building. There's the reactor head I spoke about. This is what the fuel assemblies looked like at Unit 1. They were approximately 6 by 6 inches, about 10 feet long. and there was 120 of these in the reactor vessel during operation. Here's a picture from 1962. It's just before operation, I believe the spring of 1962. Looking down into the reactor cavity. This is the Unit 1 reactor. The manipulator crane, which handles the fuel, is up here. Looks like they're doing some testing. And a few weeks ago, I took this picture. 58 years later. Obviously, Unit 1 shut down many years, but everything's still in place. Indian Point 1 was completed in '62 at the cost of approximately $125 million. It went critical on August 2nd and eventually tied to the grid on October 1st, 1962. And here's the finished product. So what you can see here is the containment building where the reactor and nuclear boilers are located. Steam exited this building, came into the superheater where it was reheated, entered the turbine building where the turbine and the generator were located, and then power left from here. These are the main transformers, up and out. Over here, these are large oil tanks which supplied oil to the superheater. This is the only picture I've ever seen of the Unit 1 turbine generator. Here's the steam turbines, which turn the generator here. Here's the exciter. This is where the 275 megawatts came from right here, inside the Unit 1 turbine hall. And this is a diagram out of nuclear, I believe it's nuclear engineering. Yeah. It's a diagram out of nuclear engineering. Again, shows a nice cutaway of the plant. Here's the containment building with the reactor in the center, the nuclear boilers that supply the steam across a bridge to the superheater. And once the steam was superheated, it came over into the turbine building where the turbines and the generator were located. This is one of the only two pictures I've ever found of the Unit 1 control room. This is in the early days. This is, I believe, in the 60s when Unit 1 was operating. That same exact location today is that. So Unit 1, which is now retired, became a part of the eventual Unit 2 control room, and I'll show you that in a minute. But here's another picture. This is the legendary Jerry Walden. This is looking from the Unit 1 control room over into the Unit 2 control room, which I believe is under construction. This is approximately 1970 to 1972. There was a short period of time that Unit 1 operated at the same time as Unit 2. And that's that same picture today. What they did eventually was Unit 1 control room became somewhat cannibalized to use for additional Unit 2 equipment. Back through the 60s and 70s, there was a visitor center at the site up on the hill. And I remember as a child getting into my parents' 1961 Ford Fairlane and driving from Yonkers up to Indian Point. And there was a small visitor center that you could visit. And they had a movie. They gave you pamphlets. And you got to look out on Unit 1. And there was also a second part of that tour, which I wish I would have gone on. That took you down to the plant and into the Unit 1 control room. There was a glass room, viewing room, where you could go in and actually watch the operation of Unit 1. And there's a short video that I have. This was taken by a local Buchanan resident on 8mm film, and we were able to acquire it a few years ago. You can see Unit 3 is under construction. Unit 2 looks like it's pretty much completed. This is about 1972, 1973. There's the visitor center. Looks like a Con Ed tour guide explaining the operation to the visitors. What didn't take long, and Conway was thinking about building bigger nuclear plants at Indian Point and at other locations. They were thinking about building reactors in Verplank and in Queens. Here's construction of Indian Point 2. This started around October of 1966. It would be a Westinghouse 4-loop pressurized water reactor, which is the common design that was being sold at that time by Westinghouse. You can see here the start of the containment building for Unit 2 being constructed just to the north of Unit 1. That's the turbine pedestal being constructed. You can see a better shot of it right there. And then Unit 3 would start 2 years later in November of '68. It would be a sister unit basically to Unit 2. And here you can see the Unit 3 containment building being constructed, Unit 3 turbine hall. Unit 2 looks like it's pretty much completed. The Unit 2 turbine hall became part of the Unit 1 turbine hall. The Unit 3 turbine hall was separate. Here's some Indian Point 3 construction photos. This is the interior of the containment building. This is where the reactor would be someday. Again, they're starting to build the Unit 3 containment building right here. This is the Unit 3 reactor vessel coming into Lentz Cove on a barge right here. The reactor vessel weighs approximately 500 tons. The reactor vessel head was 170 tons. The name of this tugboat, by the way, is the Evening Star. Here's the reactor being moved into the containment building right here. Here it's on its way in, here it's inside. And getting ready to upright the reactor vessel to put it into its final location. All these reactor vessels at the time came on this carriage that enabled you to upright them. And that polar crane there that's being used, that polar crane was installed to build the plant and is also there today, that we use it all the time during outages. Here's a close-up of the Unit 3 containment building. You can see the rebar there. This rebar is approximately 4 inches thick, and they made it like a weave. You basically couldn't even see through it. Once it was completed, it was then surrounded by concrete. Here again, Unit 3 containment building, almost completed as far as the rebar is concerned. This is the Unit 3 reactor vessel head. Looks like they're doing a test fit, or this is 1971, April 1971. This is the Unit 3 core barrel. It's a interior part of the reactor vessel, also being test fit. Just quickly, I figured we should talk about how a nuclear plant works very quickly. I have a nuclear power 101 here. The primary piece of Indian Point is its fuel. Fuel rods right here, this is called a fuel assembly. It's approximately 12 feet long, 8 by 8 inches, weighs about 1,500 pounds, and it is made up of approximately 200 rods, which hold uranium dioxide pellets in these rods, these red rods here. Actually, I brought with me a spare top nozzle here, if you want to look at it later. And the fuel is in our reactor vessel here. This is called the core. There's 193 fuel assemblies in that core. Again, the vessel weighs about 500 tons, 43 feet high. And the reactor is in the center of what we call the reactor coolant system. So this is what makes our steam. Water enters the reactor vessel, goes through the core, exits, goes through U-tubes in these steam generators, and water that is in here, a secondary water, is turned into steam and goes into our turbine hull. And here's a diagram. Again, the reactor vessel, the primary system or the reactor coolant system. Water exits the reactor vessel after being heated by the fuel, goes through U-tubes of the steam generators. Water is heated, comes over to the turbine hull, spins the turbine, is condensed by Hudson River water, and pumped back into the steam generator. Some shots of the control rooms. This is the Indian Point 2 control room, again looking from the old Indian Point 1 control room over. And in this photo, basically where this pillar is here, there used to be a wall here at one time, which was the Unit 1 control room. They started constructing the Unit 2 control room and eventually took the wall down. Back here in this little glassed-in area where the shift manager sits now is the area that the visitors used to be able to enter through a door to watch the operations in the Unit 1 control room. And this is the Indian Point 3 control room, which is completely separate from the Units 1 and 2 control room. It's in a different building and long, skinny room. This is the control room supervisor, our 2 reactor operators. We call this the flight panel, and this is called the supervisory panel. It's a big L shape. In '74, after 8 years of construction, Indian Point 2 achieved commercial operation on August 1st. And also in '74, on October 31st, Indian Point 1 was shut down since it was not in compliance with the Atomic Energy's new regulations for an emergency core cooling system. 1975, on December 12th, my 18th birthday, Indian Point 3 received its operating license from the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And also in '75, a few weeks later, Con Edison, feeling the financial pinch of years of construction of Indian Points 2 and 3, sold Indian Point 3 to the New York Power Authority. In 1976, all fuel was offloaded from the Unit 1 core when Con Ed decided that the cost of modifying it was just too great and couldn't be justified. And also in '76, Indian Point 3 achieves commercial operation on August 30th. And now, for the next 24 years, we have 2 plants operating, Indian Point 2 and Indian Point 3, different companies, Con Ed running Indian Point 2, NIPA running Indian Point 3. We have a fence between the 2 units. I spent my life at Indian Point 3 and really didn't know anybody at Indian Point 2. There was a fence to look through. It was a very strange situation. We didn't know names over there. We talked to them very infrequently. It was 2 separate worlds. When I went to work every day, I was going to Indian Point 3. I didn't know Indian Point 2 didn't exist to us, and vice versa. There was a strike in 1983 at Unit 2, Con Ed, by Local 1-2. I remember looking through the fence. Vinny, you probably remember also looking through the fence and seeing the barbecue and the pool, and they had it all set up for the management to live there, which they did. But that was finally resolved. And for the next 24 years, both plants go through many cycles of operation, usually only interrupted by maintenance or refueling outages. We talk about refueling. How do you refuel a nuclear reactor? Here's a short video on, and I'll try to explain as much as I can. It's very quick. Here's new fuel assemblies being delivered to Indian Point 3. They come in those blue canisters, 2 per canister. They usually come in the January-February time frame. Usually receive approximately 80 or 90 of them. We go into the outage. We take the reactor apart. This is the reactor vessel head being lifted off the reactor. Again, 169 tons. We flood the reactor cavity with water. We lift out the upper internals, which is over the core, and there's the reactor core with its 193 fuel assemblies. The manipulator crane you see here starts taking these fuel assemblies out one by one, bringing them over to our fuel storage building. Takes us about 48 hours to offload the core. Here you can see fuel being brought out of the core and into the fuel storage building. Now about 2 weeks later, when all the plant maintenance is completed, we load the new fuel into the spent fuel pool, about 80 or 90 assemblies, and with 100 or so old ones, we reload the core. So approximately half the core becomes new every 2 years.
Control, this is the refueling machine. We are full down at Bravo 08.
This from full down Bravo 08. You have permission to unlatch.
Understand, permission to unlatch.
That's correct.
We are unlatched and coming up.
I said unlatch coming up.
That's correct. The reload of your core is complete.
That was the last fuel assembly to be loaded at Indian Point 3 in 2019. That was the last fuel assembly to ever be loaded at Indian Point 3. At Indian Point. Let's see. Now we move up to 2000. Indian Point 3 is sold to Entergy in November, and Indian Points 1 and 2 sold to Entergy on September 6, 2001. And the fence came down. And it was very strange walking across to the other plant and finding out there's another plant just like the one you've had all these years next door. Dry cask storage, this is what I'm in now. Over the years, as the spent fuel pools at both units and nuclear plants all over the country began to fill up after numerous refuelings, it became necessary to store spent fuel on site. The process of dry fuel storage was developed in lieu of the original intent of shipping fuel to a national repository. At Indian Point, dry cask storage began in 2007. This is the Unit 3 spent fuel pool. Presently, at Unit 2, we have 1,374 cells in the spent fuel pool. 990 of those are filled with fuel. At Unit 3, we have 1,345 locations, and 1,151 of those are filled with fuel. Dry cask storage was developed, as I mentioned. It's a process where spent fuel, after being stored in the pool for a certain amount of time, can be removed, placed into a stainless steel canister, which is welded shut, dried, and filled with helium. The canister is then placed into a larger concrete-filled overpack canister called a high storm and placed onto our spent fuel storage pad, and you'll see that here in a second. This is a MPCB loaded into the Unit 2 spent fuel pool. The crane that operates it or handles it is opened, and here comes the fuel handling machine, which will load it with 32 fuel assemblies. It takes us about 12 hours. Now the loaded can is coming out of the spent fuel pool. This weld takes about 12 hours. This is sped up. There's the weld when it's completed. We now pump hot helium through this can for about 24 hours until every last molecule of water is out of it. Once it's dried, it's sealed. While that's happening, a brand new high storm comes down from our pad, being handled by our vertical cask transporter right here, and that will be brought into the fuel storage building. Now we do a thing called stack and transfer. It's like a magic act. We lift the loaded can, put it on top of the empty concrete can. We pull a trap door, and we lower the MPC full of fuel into the bottom concrete canister. And you can see now it's located down below in the concrete canister. Here it comes out of the fuel storage building with our tugger. The VCT comes over, picks it up, and brings it up to our dry cask storage pad. Very slowly. And there it is on the pad. That's a picture of our vertical cask transporter, which handles those casks. There's our dry cask storage pad. Presently has 52 of these cans on the pad. These two empties right here will be filled in the spring, and that's the last things that we'll do at Indian Point before a new company takes over. This is an aerial view, Indian Point. You can see the dry cask pad on the extreme north end of the property, and there are the high storms. On January 9th, 2017, Entergy announced the shutdown of Unit 2 on April 30th of 2020 and the shutdown of Unit 3 on April 30th of 2021. So this announcement was part of a settlement between Entergy and the state, where the state agreed to drop legal challenges and support the renewal of the plant's operating licenses until these dates. Here's a video I took a few weeks before Unit 2 was shut down. So you can see what it sounds like. Unit 2 control room. We're down to 77% power here during a coast down. So Indian Point 2, let's see if I can get it. Indian Point 2 shut down earlier this year on April 30th, and here's a quick video of the shutdown in the control room. All the red lights there, the control rods dropping into the core. And this video is the defueling of Unit 2, which occurred, the last fuel assembly came out on May 12th of 2020. Here you can see the last fuel assembly in the core. And there's empty core for the first time that will not get refilled with fuel. So presently, Indian Point 3 will be defueled in May of 2021. And following the shutdown of Unit 3, about 300 employees will remain to assist with the operation of various essential systems for approximately 18 months. Dry cask operations will continue until about 2024 when both pools will be empty. And the new company, CDI Holtec, will perform decommissioning and dismantling of Indian Point. This is Andrew? I knew that was you. This is a great, people saw this out in the hall. This is a great rendition, a great creation here by Andrew Barthelmus. Did I get it? I have one of these at home in my office, and it shows everything we kind of talked about today. So the artist is here. That's all I have, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. I want to thank all of the presenters. I think they did an excellent job, and I hope all of you go away here with a little bit more knowledge of our area, a little bit more appreciation of the history. Remind you again, if you care to join, if you're not a member of the museum, you can join. There are blue cards over there where you can sign up for the membership. We appreciate all of you who gave a donation today, and again, I want to express our gratitude to the Henry Hudson Library, letting us use this space for free, and also to Entergy for helping underwrite this program and other programs we've done. Hopefully next year this COVID thing goes away and we can have more programs and we don't have to sit so far apart from each other. But maybe that's not a bad thing. I did shower today, though. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out, and again, to our presenters, thanks so much. Appreciate it.